She called the police on a man in an expensive suit for not belonging in the bank. What she didn't know: he owned every inch of that building. This is the most catastrophic 13 minutes in corporate history. The security footage would later show the exact moment Sandra Mitchell signed her own professional death warrant. Frame 2847 captured her pointing at the marble floor, her mouth forming words that would cost her employer $4 billion. "People like you don't belong here." The man she was addressing wore a $6,000 suit and owned every molecule of air she was breathing. He was also her boss's boss's boss. She just didn't know it yet. The September morning arrived with the kind of cruel brightness that makes tragedies feel more obscene. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows of Heritage Financial's flagship branch, illuminating Italian marble floors that had witnessed decades of wealth-changing hands. Each ray of light seemed to announce that this was a temple of prosperity, a cathedral where money spoke the only language that mattered. Jonathan Drake pushed through the revolving doors at exactly 10:47 a.m., his entrance as unremarkable as thousands that came before. His charcoal Brioni suit had been custom-tailored in Milan, the fabric alone costing more than most people spent on their entire wardrobe. Italian leather shoes from a Florentine craftsman whispered against marble with each measured step. The briefcase in his hand was understated but exquisite, the kind of accessory that signaled serious money to anyone who knew how to read such signs. The lobby stretched before him like a monument to financial supremacy. Crystal chandeliers from Prague hung from coffered ceilings detailed with gold leaf. Mahogany panels lined walls adorned with abstract art worth millions. The air itself seemed perfumed with wealth, carrying notes of expensive cologne, fresh flowers arranged daily by a boutique florist, and the subtle scent of old money that permeated everything. Jonathan approached the Premier Services desk, where nameplate holders gleamed under strategic lighting. Behind the polished counter sat two women who looked like they'd been hired from the same catalog. Professionally blonde, expertly made up, radiating the kind of confidence that comes from gatekeeping access to serious wealth. "Good morning," Jonathan said, his voice carrying the cultivated neutrality of someone who'd attended the right schools, moved in the right circles, made the right connections. "I need immediate access to my executive account portfolio. There's an urgent matter requiring attention." The blonde on the left, whose nameplate identified her as Melissa Chun, looked up from her computer screen. Her professional smile remained fixed, but something in her eyes shifted like clouds blocking the sun. She performed a visual scan of Jonathan that felt clinical, invasive, measuring, and finding him wanting in ways her training should have taught her to conceal. The silence extended beyond comfort into territory that felt deliberately hostile. 1 second. 2. 3. Long enough for the security cameras to capture her expression transforming from neutral professionalism into something that would haunt her nightmares for years to come. "I'm sorry." Melissa's voice carried a tone that suggested she wasn't sorry at all. "You need access to what?" "My executive account portfolio," Jonathan repeated, each word precisely enunciated. "As I mentioned, it's urgent." Melissa exchanged a glance with her colleague, a brunette whose nameplate read, Ashley Morrison. The look that passed between them was loaded with assumptions, conclusions drawn from visual data that had nothing to do with account balances or business credentials. "Sir," Ashley began, and the way she deployed that single syllable transformed it into a weapon. "Are you certain you're in the correct location? This is Heritage Financial's Premier Services Division. We exclusively handle high-net-worth individuals and institutional relationships." The words detonated across the lobby with the force of a social grenade. 17 conversations died simultaneously. Coffee cups froze halfway to lips. The elderly gentleman reading the Financial Times actually lowered his paper, eyes wide with the horrified fascination of someone witnessing a car accident in slow motion. Jonathan felt every pair of eyes in the lobby lock onto him like targeting systems. He'd felt this before countless times throughout his life, but never in his own building. Never in a space he personally controlled. "I'm precisely where I need to be," Jonathan replied, his voice carrying the kind of controlled calm that precedes earthquakes. Melissa's fingers moved across her keyboard with aggressive efficiency. "Sir, I'm not seeing any executive accounts under your name in our system. Perhaps you're thinking of one of our community branches? There's an excellent location approximately." "I don't need a community branch." Jonathan's interruption was surgical. "I need access to my files here. Now." Ashley leaned forward with predatory interest. "Sir," Heritage Financial takes attempted fraud very seriously. If you're experiencing financial difficulties, there are legitimate resources available. But attempting to access accounts that don't belong to you is a criminal matter. The accusation hung in the air like toxic gas. Around the lobby, smartphones materialized with the speed of weapons being drawn. A young woman near the ATM had already started recording, her phone angled to capture everything, eyes gleaming with the anticipation of viral content. "Ladies," Jonathan said, his tone so controlled it was terrifying, "I'm going to need to speak with your branch manager. Immediately." Melissa's laugh could have shattered the crystal overhead. "Our branch manager handles relationships valued in the 8 figures, sir. I seriously doubt she has time for—" She paused, her eyes performing another insulting scan of his appearance. "For whatever situation you believe you're experiencing. Then I suggest you make time," Jonathan replied. That's when Sandra Mitchell emerged from her glass-walled office like a general responding to an invasion of her territory. She'd managed this branch for 9 years, climbing from assistant manager to branch director through a combination of ruthless efficiency and an almost supernatural ability to assess people's financial worth at a glance. Her record was perfect. She'd never misread a client, never misjudged a situation, never made a mistake that cost the bank money. Until today. Her Louboutin heels struck marble with the staccato rhythm of someone absolutely certain of their authority. Each step announced dominance, control, the unshakable confidence of a woman who'd built her career on reading people correctly. "What seems to be the problem?" Sandra's voice carried the kind of Arctic professionalism that made it clear she'd already decided this situation was beneath her attention. "This individual claims he requires executive account access," Melissa reported, her tone suggesting she'd just described someone claiming to be Napoleon. "He's being extremely insistent despite us explaining our clientele requirements." Sandra examined Jonathan with the clinical detachment of a jeweler identifying cubic zirconia masquerading as diamonds. Her eyes catalogued everything. His skin color, his features, some calculation happening behind her eyes that had nothing to do with the quality of his suit or the obvious expense of his accessories. "Sir," Sandra said, her voice dripping with condescension, "Heritage Financial Premier Services maintains very specific standards for our executive account holders. I'm going to need comprehensive verification before we proceed. Government-issued identification, social security documentation, recent bank statements, tax returns from the past 3 years, and a detailed explanation of exactly what business you believe you have here." The last phrase landed like a slap. "What business you believe you have here." The presumption of illegitimacy coded into every syllable. Jonathan reached into his jacket with deliberate slowness. As his hand emerged with his wallet, something caught the light. A flash of metal, the corner of a card bearing distinctive platinum edging and microscopic security features that fewer than 20 people in the entire city were authorized to possess. He placed his driver's license on the marble counter with a soft click that somehow echoed through the lobby like a gunshot. Sandra picked it up as if it might be contaminated. "Jonathan Drake," she read aloud, transforming his name into an indictment. Her eyes flicked from the ID to his face and back again, some internal calculation refusing to compute. "Mr. Drake," she continued, her voice hardening into something ugly, "I'm going to be direct with you. What I cannot understand is why someone of your particular background believes they have business requiring executive-level intervention at this institution." The words detonated like a bomb in the hushed lobby. The elderly gentleman with the Financial Times made a strangled sound. A woman wearing Van Cleef jewelry actually gasped aloud. Even Marcus, the security guard who'd worked here for 12 years and thought he'd seen everything, visibly flinched. Behind them, the young woman recording whispered into her phone, "This is absolutely insane. We're watching discrimination happen in real time at Heritage Financial. This is going to explode." Jonathan remained motionless as the marble beneath his feet. "Ms. Mitchell, I believe we have a fundamental misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding, Mr. Drake, is your delusion that you belong in this establishment." Sandra's voice rose like a prosecuting attorney delivering a closing argument. "This is Heritage Financial's flagship location. We serve Fortune 500 executives, federal court judges, generational wealth families. Not individuals seeking handouts or attempting to perpetrate check fraud schemes." The lobby had transformed into a frozen tableau. 23 witnesses, 4 accomplices behind the counter, 2 security guards, and one architect of her own destruction, all suspended in a moment that security cameras were capturing in high definition. Jonathan's phone buzzed with an incoming message. The screen illuminated with text visible to anyone close enough to read. Board meeting prepared. All directors confirmed. ETA 15 minutes. Sandra's eyes locked onto the phone like a missile acquiring its target. Sir, put that distraction away immediately. You're disrupting our legitimate clients and creating an unsafe environment. If you don't leave voluntarily in the next 30 seconds, I'm calling the police. That's when Jonathan Drake smiled. Not broadly, not threateningly. Just a microscopic shift of his lips that somehow changed the molecular composition of the room itself, like watching gravity reverse direction. Ms. Mitchell, he said, his voice now carrying harmonics that made every person present unconsciously lean forward. I believe it's time we had that private conversation. From his briefcase, Jonathan extracted a single manila folder. As it opened, Sandra glimpsed letterhead that made her cardiovascular system attempt immediate evacuation through the nearest exit. Heritage Financial. Executive Communications. Board of Directors. Jonathan closed the folder before full comprehension could dawn. Your office or the boardroom, Ms. Mitchell, he said softly. The choice is yours, but I strongly recommend privacy for what comes next. Sandra Mitchell's world began fracturing like glass under invisible pressure. The folder in Jonathan's hands radiated menace in ways she couldn't articulate. She glimpsed that letterhead, official, embossed, impossibly familiar, but her mind rejected what her eyes had registered. My office, she managed, her voice betraying the first hairline crack in 9 years of absolute certainty. Wise choice, Jonathan replied, closing his briefcase with surgical precision. Around them, the marble lobby had transformed into a coliseum. 23 pairs of eyes tracked their movement like predators watching wounded prey stumble toward inevitable slaughter. The young woman's recording had already hit 18,000 views and climbing exponentially. The comment section metastasized with viral fury. Someone identify this racist manager immediately. Heritage Financial about to lose billions. This man better sue them into bankruptcy. Screen recording everything before they delete. Sandra's heels clicked against marble like a countdown to execution. Each step toward her glass office felt like walking a plank over shark-infested waters. Behind them, Melissa grabbed Ashley's wrist with fingernails that drew blood. Did you see that folder? She hissed, her voice pitched higher than a smoke alarm. What if we just what? Ashley snapped back, but her bravado cracked like cheap veneer under pressure. Jonathan followed Sandra into her sanctuary of awards and ego. Customer service plaques lined the walls like scalps from conquered territories. Family photos projected false warmth. Motivational posters about excellence and integrity that would soon become ironic tombstones marking the death of her career. Sandra closed the door, but glass walls offered zero privacy. Every gesture, every micro-expression, every moment of her professional disintegration remained visible to the growing crowd outside. She could see phones pressed against glass, cameras recording every angle, dozens of people sensing blood in the water and pressing close to witness the kill. Mr. Drake, she began, desperately attempting to resurrect her managerial authority. Perhaps we can resolve this misunderstanding privately before. Before what? Jonathan opened the manila folder with the ceremony of a priest performing last rites. Before 50,000 people witness your discrimination? Too late. Before the media picks up the story? Already happening. Before your career is destroyed? Ms. Mitchell, we passed that exit approximately 10 minutes ago. Sandra's eyes locked onto the letterhead like a deer staring into high beams. Her brain processed the words. Heritage Financial, Executive Communications. But the signature at the bottom made her cardiovascular system attempt immediate evacuation. This document, Jonathan said with the calm of a surgeon explaining terminal diagnosis, concerns systematic discrimination patterns across our branch network. Patterns that have been meticulously documented, analyzed, and traced directly back to leadership failures at this location. That pronoun, our, struck Sandra like a physical blow. She gripped her desk edge, knuckles bleaching white as bone. Outside her glass cage, the crowd had multiplied like bacteria in a petri dish. Upper floor executives descended, drawn by whispers spreading through the building faster than wildfire. The elderly gentleman abandoned his Financial Times entirely, pressing close to the glass. Even the bronze eagles adorning the lobby seemed to lean forward in anticipation of carnage. Marcus, the security guard, shifted nervously by the entrance. His radio erupted with static. Marcus, status report. Social media is lighting up about some kind of incident at your location. He keyed his microphone with trembling fingers. Situation escalating, sir. We may need additional personnel. How many people are we talking about? Marcus scanned the lobby. The crowd had doubled in the past 3 minutes. Phones everywhere, all recording. Approximately 50 witnesses, sir. And counting. Inside the glass fishbowl, Sandra was drowning in slow motion. Mr. Drake, she whispered, her voice disintegrating like paper in acid. I need to understand exactly who you are. Jonathan studied her with the clinical interest of an entomologist examining a particularly fascinating specimen pinned to a board. I'm the man you just humiliated in front of 50 witnesses, 6 security cameras, and, he checked his phone, 94,000 social media viewers. I'm also the person whose signature appears on your employment contract, your performance reviews, and your termination paperwork. The number hit Sandra like a sledgehammer to the solar plexus. 94,000 people had watched her destroy someone. 94,000 witnesses to her professional suicide. Her personal phone erupted with notifications. Her sister, her mother, her college roommate, her yoga instructor. Every person she'd ever known was watching her professional suicide broadcast in high definition, tagged and shared and commented upon by strangers who would never forget her name or her face or the ugliness of what she'd revealed about herself. This can't be happening, she muttered, staring at her device like it had transformed into a venomous snake. But it is happening, Jonathan replied with the patience of a teacher explaining basic mathematics to a struggling student. And it's happening because you made a choice. Multiple choices, actually. Each one documented, time-stamped, and admissible in court. He withdrew a second folder from his briefcase, thicker than the first, more ominous in its implications. These are discrimination complaints filed against your branch over the past 24 months. Would you care to guess how many? Sandra's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, producing only the faint whistle of air moving through her constricted throat. 89 complaints, Ms. Mitchell. 89 human beings who were judged, humiliated, and driven away based solely on your staff's prejudices operating under your direct supervision. Each number fell like a hammer blow on the coffin of her career. Carmen Rodriguez, denied business banking services because she didn't look like a business owner. Michael Chun, accused of check fraud when depositing his Tesla paycheck. Dr. Jennifer Williams, told she should try the community branch despite having a medical degree from Johns Hopkins and an 8-figure net worth. The names created a symphony of shame. Sandra recognized every case, had personally dismissed every complaint, had convinced herself each decision was justified, professional, necessary, protecting the bank's interests against people who simply didn't fit the profile of heritage financial clientele. 89 people, Ms. Mitchell. How much business did this branch lose? How many relationships were destroyed? How many lives were damaged by systematic prejudice that you personally enabled, encouraged, and defended? Sandra's world wasn't just crumbling. It was being surgically dissected by the truth of her own documented actions, spread across Jonathan's desk like autopsy findings. Jonathan's phone buzzed. The caller ID made him pause, and for the first time, his expression shifted into something resembling grim anticipation. He answered immediately. Yes, I've seen the video. Yes, I'm in the branch currently. I'm sitting across from the branch manager as we speak. Sandra heard her title and felt her soul attempt to abandon her body through the nearest available exit. Jonathan listened intently, his expression growing more severe with each passing second. Understood. Yes, the full board needs immediate briefing. Emergency session, conference room A within the hour. He paused, looking directly at Sandra with eyes that held no mercy whatsoever. And yes, Ms. Mitchell will be joining us. This situation requires institutional response at the highest level. He ended the call and returned his phone to his jacket pocket with the deliberate care of a gunslinger holstering a weapon after a fatal duel. Outside the glass office, the crowd had swollen to nearly 70 people. Phones everywhere, multiple angles, professional quality video being streamed live to platforms around the world. The lobby had transformed into a media circus with Sandra Mitchell as the unwilling star of her own public execution. Melissa pressed her face against the glass, watching Sandra's expression disintegrate in real time. "Look at her," she whispered to Ashley. "She looks like she's watching her own death." Jonathan stood slowly, gathering his files with the methodical precision of a prosecutor preparing closing arguments in a murder trial. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that made every person within earshot unconsciously lean closer. "You're about to receive the most expensive education in corporate accountability that this industry has ever witnessed. The curriculum will be brief but comprehensive. The tuition will exceed your lifetime earning capacity. And the diploma will be a cautionary tale studied in business schools for the next 50 years. Sandra's chair creaked as she attempted to stand on legs that felt like overcooked pasta. Where are we going?" Jonathan smiled, that small, terrifying smile that had been haunting her since this conversation began. "The boardroom, Ms. Mitchell. It's time you met some very important people who are extremely interested in understanding how you managed to cause $4 billion in damage before lunch." The elevator ride to the 27th floor lasted exactly 53 seconds. 53 seconds of suffocating silence that felt like descending into the deepest circle of hell with no possibility of redemption. Sandra Mitchell pressed herself against the polished brass wall, watching floor numbers climb like a countdown to her own execution. Her reflection stared back at her. Mascara streaking, foundation cracking like drought-damaged earth. The face of a woman watching her entire existence collapse in real time. Jonathan Drake stood beside her with the stillness of an apex predator who knows the prey has nowhere left to run. His breathing remained steady. His posture relaxed. His expression held the terrifying calm of a man who owned not just this elevator, but every molecule of air she was desperately trying to breathe. The numbers climbed. 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. "Ms. Mitchell," Jonathan said, his voice softer than velvet and deadlier than cyanide. "Before those doors open, I need you to understand something with absolute crystal clarity." Sandra's throat constricted like a python's embrace around its prey. What happened downstairs wasn't just discrimination. It was a masterpiece of institutional racism performed in ultra-high definition and broadcast to 340,000 viewers. You didn't just humiliate one customer. You gutted this organization's reputation with surgical precision. You transformed Heritage Financial from a respected institution into a cautionary tale about everything toxic in American banking. The elevator doors opened like the mouth of a dragon revealing its lair. The executive floor was Mount Olympus made manifest in marble and mahogany. Hand-carved panels lined corridors wide enough for royalty to parade through. Original Rothkos and Pollocks adorned walls like windows into dimensions where money spoke the only language. The carpet beneath their feet had been woven by Belgian artisans and cost more per square foot than Sandra earned in a month. But she noticed none of this opulence. Her universe had collapsed to the sound of Jonathan's footsteps echoing like gunshots and the thunderous pounding of her heart, which felt like it might detonate from pure terror. They passed offices belonging to financial deities whose names moved markets. Doors bearing nameplates that represented more power than Sandra had ever dreamed of touching. Each threshold they crossed brought her closer to a reckoning that would redefine the concept of professional destruction. At the corridor's end, double doors crafted from Brazilian rosewood guarded the inner sanctum where her fate would be pronounced with mathematical precision. Jonathan paused at those doors, his hand caressing handles that gleamed like molten gold. "Ms. Mitchell, in approximately 20 seconds, you're going to discover why this moment will be studied in business schools for the next 50 years. Are you prepared to become a cautionary tale?" Sandra's voice emerged as barely a whisper. I still don't understand who." "Understanding is coming." Jonathan pushed open the doors with the ceremony of an executioner revealing the gallows. The boardroom was the Vatican of capitalism. A table carved from a single piece of 1,000-year-old Indonesian teak dominated the space, surrounded by leather chairs that cost more than luxury automobiles. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a godlike view of the city sprawling below like an empire awaiting commands. And seated around that table were the 12 most dangerous people in American finance. Victoria Chun, whose investment decisions could topple governments before breakfast. Robert Thompson, former Federal Reserve Chairman whose whispered words moved trillions. Sarah Palmer, the legal assassin who'd rewritten banking law with her bare hands. James Rodriguez, the federal prosecutor who'd sent corporate titans to federal prison like a farmer harvesting wheat. 12 economic predators. 12 people who controlled more wealth than most nations. 12 individuals whose combined power could reshape reality itself. They looked up as Jonathan entered, their expressions shifting from professional courtesy to confusion as they noticed Sandra following behind like a lamb being led to ritual slaughter. "Jonathan," Victoria Chin said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never been refused anything in her life. "We've all seen the video. Please tell us you're not the victim in that footage." Sandra's brain experienced complete system failure. Jonathan was the victim, which meant he was. The realization hit her like a freight train loaded with liquid nitrogen. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jonathan announced, his voice filling the boardroom like the voice of God announcing Judgment Day, "I present Sandra Mitchell, manager of our flagship downtown branch." The temperature plummeted to absolute zero. Sandra felt 12 pairs of eyes lock onto her like heat-seeking missiles acquiring their target. These weren't executives. They were apex predators who'd built empires from the bones of people exactly like her. "Ms. Mitchell," Jonathan continued with the ceremonial precision of a high priest performing ritual sacrifice, "meet the board of directors of Heritage Financial." The words detonated in Sandra's skull like atomic bombs. Board of directors. His board of directors. Her knees buckled. Only a desperate grip on the door frame prevented her complete collapse, as the magnitude of her catastrophe finally penetrated her consciousness like acid eating through steel. "No," she whispered, the word escaping like steam from a ruptured pipe. "No, no, no. You can't be." "I didn't. I'm Jonathan Drake," he replied, moving to the head of the table where a throne of leather and authority awaited him. He gestured toward the brass nameplate gleaming in afternoon sunlight. "Jonathan Drake, Chief Executive Officer. President and Chief Executive Officer of Heritage Financial," he continued. "The signature on every corporate communication. The face that appears on annual reports. The person ultimately responsible for every decision made in this organization, including the decision about your future that we're about to make right now." Sandra's vision exploded into white-hot static. Reality fractured like glass struck by lightning as her brain attempted to process information that violated every law of her universe. The man she'd humiliated, threatened with arrest, discriminated against in front of hundreds of witnesses. Her ultimate boss, the signature on every paycheck. The person who could destroy her with less effort than swatting a fly. "Oh God," she whispered, and the words echoed in the cathedral boardroom like blasphemy in a church. "Oh sweet Jesus. Oh God, oh God, oh God." Jonathan settled into his chair like a king claiming his birthright. Around the table, 12 faces registered expressions ranging from volcanic fury to barely restrained homicidal intent. Robert Thompson's face had turned the color of fresh arterial blood. "Mr. Drake, please tell me you weren't actually threatened with police action in your own goddamn building." "I was threatened with arrest," Jonathan confirmed with surgical precision, "by Ms. Mitchell in front of 87 witnesses, while attempting to conduct routine banking business in professional attire." Sarah Palmer leaned forward like a shark scenting blood in the water. "And this entire incident was recorded? Multiple angles? Professional quality. Currently approaching 450,000 views with exponential growth," Jonathan confirmed. "Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. The story's been picked up by CNN, MSNBC, Fox Business. We're trending globally." The number hit the boardroom like a tactical nuclear strike. 450,000 people had watched their CEO being racially profiled by his own employee. 450,000 witnesses to systematic discrimination operating under their corporate logo. 450,000 pieces of evidence in what would become the most expensive lawsuit in banking history. "Ms. Mitchell," Victoria Chen's voice could have frozen the surface of the sun, "explain to us immediately why you refused service to our chief executive officer." Sandra's mouth worked like a fish dying on dry land. Her vocal cords had seized. No explanation existed in any language that could justify the unjustifiable. I couldn't have known. He looked how? James Rodriguez's prosecutorial instincts engaged like weapon systems coming online. "Be specific, Ms. Mitchell. Describe exactly what you saw that made you conclude our CEO didn't belong in his own building." Sandra realized she was standing on a cliff edge. Any answer would be an admission of racial bias. Silence would be an admission of guilt. "Different," she finally croaked, the word escaping like poison. "Different how?" Specifically, Rodriguez pressed, his voice dissecting her like a scalpel cutting into diseased tissue. Sandra's face crumpled as she understood the trap. Every possible response confirmed her racism. Every word she spoke would be used against her in the court of public opinion, and probably several actual courts. "Ms. Mitchell," Jonathan said softly, his voice now carrying harmonics that made the chandelier crystals vibrate sympathetically. "You discriminated against me because I'm black. In 2024. In my own building. While wearing the uniform of institutional authority." Each word fell like a sledgehammer, destroying the foundation of her existence. That discrimination was witnessed, recorded, and broadcast to nearly 500,000 viewers. "You've created the most catastrophic public relations disaster in banking history. You've exposed systematic racism operating under our logo. You've potentially cost this institution billions in lost business, legal settlements, and reputational annihilation that will take years to repair." Sandra swayed like a skyscraper in an earthquake, her entire foundation liquefied. Around the table, 12 of the most ruthless people in American finance studied her with expressions that promised swift, merciless, biblical justice. Jonathan Williams smiled that small, apocalyptic smile one final time. "Ms. Mitchell, congratulations. You've just earned your PhD in corporate destruction. Now let's discuss the tuition." The boardroom fell silent as a tomb at midnight. 12 titans of American finance sat motionless, their collective fury, so dense it seemed to consume oxygen. Sandra Mitchell clung to her chair like a shipwrecked survivor grasping driftwood, her breathing shallow and desperate. Jonathan Drake opened his laptop with surgical precision. The screen's blue glow painted his face like digital war paint as he began Sandra's professional execution with the methodical efficiency of a surgeon performing an autopsy. "Before we discuss Ms. Mitchell's future," he said, his voice carrying the weight of divine judgment, "let's examine the financial carnage she's created in the past 6 hours." The wall-mounted screen flickered to life. Numbers appeared that made several board members audibly gasp. $1.2 billion in market capitalization evaporated like morning mist. Stock price plummeting 8.4% since her video went viral. Social media impressions climbing past 3.1 million with 96% negative sentiment. The Heritage Financial brand transformed from trusted institution to symbol of institutional racism in less time than it takes to eat lunch. Sandra stared at the numbers like a mathematician trying to solve her own death equation. $1.2 billion, Robert Thompson repeated, each word dropping like a stone into still water. "Ms. Mitchell, your bigotry has cost this institution over $1 billion in exactly 6 hours. Do you comprehend the magnitude of that number?" Sandra's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, producing only strangled whispers that might have been prayers to gods who'd already abandoned her. Jonathan clicked to reveal more devastating data. Federal civil rights violations with potential damages reaching $300 million. Title VII claims with unlimited punitive exposure. FDIC regulatory fines starting at $40 million. State violations adding another $95 million in liability. Class action lawsuit exposure from 89 documented discrimination cases, totaling estimated damages of $200 million. Conservative estimates place our legal exposure at $635 million, Jonathan said with the calm of a surgeon explaining terminal diagnosis. That assumes we can contain the hemorrhaging, which becomes more difficult every second this video continues spreading like a virus through social media. Sarah Palmer leaned forward like a shark detecting blood in water. "Jonathan, are we looking at the largest discrimination settlement in banking history?" "We're looking at the largest discrimination settlement in American corporate history," he replied. "Ms. Mitchell hasn't just broken records. She's obliterated them. She's created a new category of corporate negligence that will be studied for decades." The next revelation made Sandra emit a sound like air escaping from punctured lungs. Customer defection projections showed 3,247 high-net-worth accounts at immediate risk. Average account value of $1.8 million. Potential deposit loss of $5.8 billion, with annual revenue impact of $174 million. Victoria Chen's voice could have frozen liquid helium. "Ms. Mitchell, your racism has potentially cost us nearly $6 billion in deposits. Do you comprehend what that means?" Sandra tried to speak, but produced only sounds that barely qualified as human language. It means, Chin continued, her whisper somehow more terrifying than screaming, that your prejudice has caused more financial damage than natural disasters, more than cyber attacks, more than any single incident in our 90-year history. Jonathan revealed the regulatory nightmare Sandra had unleashed. 9 federal agencies investigating, 18 state banking departments launching probes, mandatory discrimination audits across all 1,247 branches, 7-year compliance monitoring with possible board restructuring. The Department of Justice considering a pattern and practice investigation of their entire network. James Rodriguez studied the data with predatory intensity. Jonathan, how many congressional representatives are demanding hearings? 5 so far, but the number's climbing hourly. Senator Morrison from the Banking Committee called personally. She wants to make this a case study in institutional racism. Senator Park is drafting legislation named after this incident, the Heritage Financial Accountability Act. Sandra made a strangled sound that might have been her soul departing her body. Ms. Mitchell, Rodriguez said, his prosecutorial instincts fully weaponized, do you understand that your actions have triggered the largest civil rights investigation in banking history? That your name will be attached to federal legislation? That law students will study your decisions as examples of criminal negligence? But the final revelation shattered what remained of Sandra's sanity. The viral numbers were astronomical and accelerating. 11.4 million video views across all platforms. 387 news articles and counting. International coverage spanning 127 countries. 6 different hashtags trending globally, each one a nail in her professional coffin. Hashtag Heritage Financial Racism. 3.2 million tweets hashtag Boycott Heritage. 1.4 million mentions hashtag Sandra Mitchell Racist. 847,000 tagged posts calling for her head hashtag Jonathan Drake. 2.1 million posts praising his dignity hashtag Banking While Black. 1.9 million stories of similar discrimination hashtag Justice for Jonathan. 1.6 million demands for accountability. She had achieved immortality as the face of institutional racism. Her name would forever be synonymous with prejudice broadcast globally. She was the symbol of everything toxic in American banking, and that symbol would outlive her by generations. Ms. Mitchell, Jonathan said, his voice now carrying harmonics that seemed to vibrate through the building's steel skeleton. You have 60 seconds to explain why this board shouldn't terminate you immediately and pursue personal damages for the destruction you've caused. The silence stretched like a piano wire about to snap. Sandra's voice emerged as barely a whisper. I never meant for this to happen. You never meant what? Victoria Chen's words cut like surgical steel. To be racist? To humiliate our CEO? To cost us billions? To destroy our reputation? Which part didn't you mean, Ms. Mitchell? I didn't know who he was, Sandra croaked, the admission escaping like blood from a severed artery. The confession hit the boardroom like a nuclear detonation. You didn't know who he was, Robert Thompson repeated, savoring each syllable like aged whiskey. So you felt justified discriminating against him because you assumed he was what, exactly? Sandra stood at the edge of a precipice with nowhere to retreat. Any answer would confirm racial profiling. Silence would confirm guilt. She was trapped in a cage built from her own prejudices. Someone who didn't belong, she whispered, the words barely audible. Someone who didn't belong, James Rodriguez repeated, dissecting the phrase like a coroner examining cause of death. Based on what criteria did you determine that our CEO didn't belong in his own building? Patricia's silence screamed louder than any confession could. Jonathan closed his laptop with the finality of a judge's gavel ending a trial. Ms. Mitchell, you discriminated against me because I'm black. You saw my skin color and immediately concluded I was a threat. A criminal. Someone to be removed rather than served. That racist assumption, operating under your direct supervision and authority, has cost this organization billions in damages, triggered federal investigations, and exposed systematic discrimination operating under our corporate banner. Each word struck like lightning, illuminating the darkness of her choices. You've created the most expensive civil rights violation in American business history. You've transformed this institution from respected financial leader into international symbol of institutional racism. You've personally ensured that Heritage Financial will be associated with discrimination for the next decade. Sandra sat paralyzed, watching her existence disintegrate in real time. Around the table, 12 economic predators rendered their verdict with expressions promising no quarter, no mercy, no second chances. "Ms. Mitchell," Jonathan said, his voice carrying the authority of corporate law itself, "your employment with Heritage Financial is terminated immediately. Security will escort you from the building within the next 15 minutes. Your pension is forfeit. Your stock options are void. Your professional references will reflect termination for cause related to discrimination." The words echoed like death knells in a cathedral. "Furthermore," he continued, "our legal department will pursue personal liability claims against you for damages exceeding your lifetime earning capacity. We will seek disgorgement of all compensation you received during the period you were committing systematic discrimination. You will spend the rest of your existence paying for today's racism." Sandra's world didn't just end. It was systematically demolished piece by piece until nothing remained but the echo of her own prejudice destroying everything she'd ever built. The video of your discrimination will be used in training programs across the industry. Your case will be studied in law schools, business schools, diversity programs. Your name will become synonymous with the consequences of institutional racism. You will be remembered, Ms. Mitchell, but not the way you hoped. Jonathan smiled that terrifying smile one final time. "Ms. Mitchell, congratulations. You've just received the most expensive education in human decency ever administered. The tuition was your entire life. I hope it was worth it." Sandra Mitchell's professional execution was swift and merciless. Within 60 minutes of her termination, security had escorted her from the building like a criminal being perp-walked for cameras. Her access cards deactivated, her company car keys confiscated, her nameplate removed from the branch manager's office, and deposited into a dumpster alongside 9 years of accumulated career detritus. The video of her humiliation walk went viral faster than her original racist performance. Cameras captured every step of her descent from corporate power to social pariah. The woman who'd tried to have Jonathan Drake arrested was now fleeing her own building in shame, pursued by reporters shouting questions she couldn't answer without further incriminating herself. But Jonathan Drake wasn't interested in personal revenge. He was interested in systematic transformation that would ensure this never happened again. By 7 p.m. that same day, he'd implemented the most comprehensive anti-discrimination protocol in banking history. Not just policies on paper, but technological warfare against institutional racism that would revolutionize the entire industry. The Equity Guardian system went live across all 1,247 branches simultaneously. Every customer interaction would be recorded, analyzed, and scored for bias indicators using artificial intelligence trained on millions of interactions. Wait times tracked by demographic. Service quality measured across racial lines. Treatment disparities flagged in real time and escalated to corporate headquarters within minutes. Branch managers discovered their bias scores displayed on dashboards visible to every employee. Poor ratings triggered immediate retraining. Repeated failures resulted in automatic termination. No appeals. No second chances. Discrimination would be treated like embezzlement, a career-ending crime with immediate consequences. The Customer Dignity Hotline bypassed local management entirely. Any discrimination complaint reached Jonathan's desk within 3 hours, complete with security footage, employee records, AI analysis, and recommended disciplinary action. The message was crystal clear. Racism would be investigated at the highest corporate level with maximum transparency. Jonathan personally reviewed the first week's reports. 43 discrimination incidents flagged across the network. 43 opportunities to demonstrate that the Sandra Mitchell era was permanently extinct. The Chicago branch fired 3 tellers for racial profiling. The Phoenix location terminated an assistant manager for refusing service to a Hispanic customer. The Atlanta branch cleaned house entirely, removing 7 employees whose bias scores indicated systematic discrimination. The Seattle branch manager was terminated after AI analysis revealed a pattern of longer wait times for customers of color. Each termination was announced publicly. Each incident became a teaching moment broadcast across social media. The banking industry watched in amazement as Heritage Financial transformed from discriminatory institution to equality pioneer in a matter of weeks. The technology was revolutionary, but the cultural change ran deeper. Jonathan instituted dignity audits. Corporate executives dressed casually testing whether they received equal treatment regardless of appearance. The results were initially sobering. 52% of branches failed their first audit. But failure carried consequences that resonated throughout the organization. Failed branch managers faced immediate suspension. Failed regions triggered comprehensive review. Failed executives found their bonuses tied to bias reduction metrics with zero tolerance for repeated failures. The message penetrated every level of the hierarchy. Discrimination wasn't just morally wrong. It was professionally suicidal. Training programs evolved beyond sensitivity workshops into immersive experiences designed by psychologists and civil rights experts. Employees experienced simulated discrimination scenarios that generated genuine empathy. Managers faced realistic consequences for their staff's biased behavior. Customer service ratings incorporated equality metrics that affected compensation, advancement, and employment status. The legal settlements came next, but they served justice rather than corporate cover-up. Jonathan personally approved $587 million in payouts to discrimination victims, accompanied by public apologies and policy reforms that exceeded legal requirements. Each settlement included monitoring provisions, ensuring systematic change rather than financial absolution. Victims received not just money, but validation. Their experiences acknowledged institutionally. Their pain respected completely. Their dignity restored publicly. The Sandra Mitchell case became the flagship settlement. Her 89 documented victims received substantial compensation, but more importantly, they received vindication. Maria Santos, who'd been denied business banking services, received $2.4 million and a public apology. She used the settlement to launch the business Heritage had rejected, which now employed 47 people and generated $12 million in annual revenue. The NAACP praised Heritage Financial's transformation as a model for corporate America. The Department of Justice closed its investigation after determining that systematic reforms exceeded federal requirements. Congressional hearings showcased Heritage Financial as proof that institutional racism could be eliminated through leadership commitment and technological innovation. Senator Morrison's proposed Heritage Financial Accountability Act became federal law, requiring all major banks to implement similar monitoring systems. Jonathan testified before Congress, describing how discrimination had been costing the industry hundreds of billions in lost opportunities. But the most powerful transformation was cultural. Within 4 months, Heritage Financial's employee demographics shifted dramatically. Diversity hiring increased 73%. Retention of employees of color improved 91%. Customer satisfaction among minority communities reached historic highs. Employee engagement scores among diverse staff members climbed from 43% to 87%. The business results followed the moral transformation. Customer deposits increased by $3.7 billion as communities of color trusted Heritage Financial with their financial futures. New account openings among minority-owned businesses surged 387%. Revenue from previously underserved markets exploded, adding $423 million to the bottom line. Jonathan had proven that equality wasn't just ethically required, it was economically beneficial. Discrimination had been costing the bank hundreds of millions in lost opportunities, damaged relationships, and legal exposure. Elimination of bias unlocked previously inaccessible markets and customer bases worth billions. The industry took notice. Other banks began implementing similar monitoring systems. Discrimination protocols became standard practice. The Heritage Financial Standard emerged as the gold standard for equality in financial services, adopted by institutions managing over $14 trillion in assets. Jonathan received invitations to speak at Harvard Business School, where his discrimination experience became required curriculum. Banking conferences featured his equality framework as must-attend sessions. The Federal Reserve invited him to advise on industry-wide bias elimination initiatives. The White House asked him to join a task force on economic equity. But the most satisfying moment came 8 months later, when a young Black entrepreneur named Destiny Washington opened her first business account at the downtown branch where Sandra Mitchell had once ruled. The new manager, Carmen Rodriguez, one of Sandra's former victims who'd been hired, promoted, and empowered, treated Destiny like royalty. The tellers competed to provide exceptional service. The entire staff understood that every customer interaction was an opportunity to demonstrate the values Jonathan had literally bled to establish. Destiny's account grew into an 8-figure relationship. Her tech startup succeeded beyond expectations. She hired hundreds of employees and generated millions in economic activity. She became one of Forbes 30 under 30. She credited Heritage Financial's support as instrumental to her success. All because she'd been treated with dignity instead of discrimination. Jonathan watched the interaction through security cameras, smiling that small smile that no longer carried menace. This time it carried satisfaction. Justice. The quiet triumph of a man who'd transformed personal humiliation into institutional reformation. Sandra Mitchell's racist legacy had been completely erased, replaced by a culture of equality that would outlast them all. 22 months after Sandra Mitchell's professional execution, Jonathan Drake received a phone call that made him smile, that devastating smile, one final time. The voice on the other end was broken, desperate, barely recognizable as human. Sandra Mitchell, calling from a gas station job in rural Indiana, begging for a reference letter that would never come. "Mr. Drake," she whispered, her voice fractured by months of unemployment, bankruptcy, divorce, and social exile. "I know what I did was wrong. I've lost everything. My house, my marriage, my children won't speak to me. I'm working for minimum wage. I can't find professional employment anywhere. Please, I just need a reference. I just need work." Jonathan listened to her destruction with the clinical interest of a surgeon examining successful cancer removal. "Ms. Mitchell, you cost this institution $4.2 billion and traumatized countless customers through systematic racism operating under your authority. Your consequence is permanent. I will not provide a reference. I will not absolve you. The weight of your choices is yours to carry." The line went dead. Justice finally complete. Meanwhile, the downtown branch had become a temple to transformation. Behind the same marble counter where Sandra had wielded discrimination like a weapon, Carmen Rodriguez now served as senior vice president, having risen from victim to executive in record time. The woman who'd once been denied service controlled a portfolio exceeding $2.3 billion. But the most powerful change was invisible yet infinite. Children of color entered without fear. Elderly immigrants felt welcomed rather than hunted. Young entrepreneurs of every background conducted business with dignity intact. LGBTQ+ customers found acceptance instead of judgment. People with disabilities received accommodation instead of obstacles. The simple act of banking had been liberated from generations of institutional racism. The numbers told an extraordinary story. Customer satisfaction among communities of color reached 94%, highest in the industry. New business accounts from minority entrepreneurs increased 412%. Revenue from previously excluded markets exploded to $1.4 billion annually. Discrimination had been costing them over $1 billion in lost opportunities. Marcus had proven that equality wasn't charity. It was smart business. Racism had been financial suicide disguised as policy. The viral video that destroyed Sandra's existence had evolved into the most studied case in business history. Harvard Business School required every MBA student to analyze the Mitchell discrimination incident. Stanford's business ethics program used the footage as proof that prejudice carried consequences severe enough to obliterate lives, transform institutions, and revolutionize entire industries. Other industries adopted the Heritage Financial Standard. Tech companies implemented similar monitoring. Healthcare systems deployed bias detection. Educational institutions created equity audits. The model spread like digital antibodies, eliminating institutional racism across sectors. But the most satisfying moment came last week, when Jonathan witnessed a young black entrepreneur secure an $11 million business loan at the exact counter where he'd been humiliated. The new staff competed to provide exceptional service. Every employee understood that this branch had been baptized in the blood of discrimination and reborn through systematic justice. Jonathan watched through security cameras as the entrepreneur, a 26-year-old woman building a renewable energy company, shook hands with loan officers who would have called security on her 22 months earlier. Her business would create 800 jobs, generate $240 million in economic activity, build generational wealth, all because she was treated with dignity instead of destroyed by discrimination. Standing in that transformed lobby, Jonathan remembered the burning shame of being judged by his skin color in his own building. That humiliation had birthed the most comprehensive civil rights revolution in corporate America. One filmed moment of racism had eliminated systematic discrimination across an entire industry. The revolution was documented, quantified, replicated. Heritage Financial's model became federal law. The change was permanent. Now it's your turn. Every day, someone faces the discrimination Jonathan endured. Someone is being judged by appearance rather than character. Someone's dignity is being destroyed by prejudice masquerading as policy. You have power Sandra never expected. The ability to document, expose, and destroy discrimination in real time. Record bias when you witness it. Social media has become a weapon of justice more powerful than any court. Share stories that demand accountability. Support businesses that demonstrate equality through action, not just words. Your voice matters. Your witness changes outcomes. Your refusal to stay silent transforms systems. Because Jonathan Drake demonstrated something profound. Sometimes the most devastating response to humiliation is transformation. Sometimes personal pain becomes social progress. Sometimes one person's courage can obliterate institutional racism forever. The question isn't whether discrimination still exists. The question is, when you witness it, will you be the person who ends it?